My husband told me I was paranoid, that I needed help, that I was imagining things, but I wasn't imagining the scent of her perfume on his shirt or the text I wasn't supposed to see. Part 1. When her name slipped out in his sleep. You don't expect betrayal to wear the face you've kissed goodnight for years. You don't expect it to speak in the voice that once read stories to your baby. And you certainly don't expect it to walk into your kitchen wearing heels and a smile while calling herself your friend. But betrayal isn't just about the act. It's about the build-up. The small things. The look that lingers a bit too long. The phone flipped face down on the counter. The sudden interest in cologne he hadn't worn in years. It started small. The scent of jasmine on his collar after a work trip. I didn't wear jasmine. It must be the hotel soap, he said, brushing it off. And I wanted to believe him. I did believe him, at first, because I loved him, because we had a baby, a mortgage, a history, because sometimes love blinds you harder than hate ever could. Then came the late nights, the client meetings, the sudden gym sessions at 6 a.m. when he'd never been a morning person. One night, while I was nursing our daughter, I saw his phone light up. He was asleep on the couch, mouth slightly open, a half-empty beer bottle on the floor. The screen lit twice, first with her name, Amanda, then with a message, I wish I could be there instead of her. I froze. Amanda, his colleague, the one who laughed too loud at his jokes and always seemed to need his help on last-minute projects, the one who brought homemade cookies to meetings, the one I never quite trusted, but never wanted to accuse, because I didn't want to seem like that wife. I didn't wake him. I didn't scream. I sat there, rocking my daughter, and felt the ground shift beneath me. In that moment, I wasn't a wife. I wasn't even a woman. I was a hollowed-out shell holding innocence in my arms while the man who vowed to protect us both betrayed us in his dreams. The next morning, I said nothing. I made him breakfast. I smiled. I handed him his coffee like I always did, but I watched. Every movement, every word. I became a ghost haunting my own marriage. When I finally confronted him, he laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a nervous one, the kind that scrambles to cover fear. You're being ridiculous, he said. You've always been insecure. I wanted to believe he was right, that I was just tired, hormonal, paranoid. He even said I needed therapy, that it wasn't fair to project my insecurities onto him. And for a week, I believed him. I booked a session, I blamed myself. But betrayal has a scent, a rhythm, a shadow. And once you've caught it, you can't unsee it. It was a Tuesday night when it finally cracked. He came home late, again. I was feeding the baby, listening to her little breaths, when I heard him talking in the hallway. I walked closer. He was on the phone, whispering. And then I heard it. Amanda. And I didn't just hear the name, I heard the way he said it. Soft, intimate, like a promise. He didn't even realize I was standing there until I cleared my throat. The color drained from his face. And just like that, the world we built, the nursery we painted, the vows we exchanged, the dinners, the tears, the laughter, shattered with one word, her name. Part 2, the confrontation that didn't save us. He hung up so fast I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd, like watching someone try to push water back into a glass after it spilled. He stammered, blinked too fast, ran a hand through his hair like that would fix the silence between us. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the doorway, holding our daughter, and asked the question that burned like acid in my throat. How long? His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. Please, he finally said, stepping toward me. It's not what you think. That sentence, that tired, pathetic sentence, the universal anthem of cheaters everywhere. You said her name like a prayer, I whispered. I don't say your name like that anymore. He looked away. That was the first real answer he gave me. Not in words, but in guilt, in the way he couldn't hold my gaze. I walked past him, set our daughter down in her crib. My hands were shaking. My heart wasn't broken. Not yet. That came later. This was something else. A deep, primal scream that hadn't reached my throat yet. When I returned to the living room, he was sitting on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I didn't mean for it to happen, he said without looking up. And there it was, the confession. It was like a second birth, except this time, something inside me died. She's not even 25, I said flatly. She bakes you cookies and laughs at your jokes. She doesn't know what it's like to stay up with a baby who won't sleep, or to rub your back after you pulled a muscle-moving furniture. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. I didn't plan it. That made it worse. If he had chased her, I could have chalked it up to lust, to a deliberate betrayal. But he drifted into it, quietly, slowly. He let it happen one moment at a time until it was too late. I was drowning, he said. You were always tired, always busy. We barely talked. She made me feel like I mattered again. And I didn't? Silence. I nodded, walked into the kitchen, and started pulling out a bag. Not for him, for me. I didn't know where I would go, only that I couldn't stay. Not tonight. He followed me. Don't take her away from me, he pleaded. Please. And that's when I finally broke. You took me away from her the second you chose someone else over your family. He stepped back like I slapped him. But I didn't. I didn't have the strength. I packed one suitcase, grabbed the baby bag, called my sister and said nothing except, I'm coming over. My sister didn't ask questions. She just said, come, and I left. No goodbye, no slammed doors, just silence and the soft breath of a sleeping baby in my arms. At my sister's, I didn't cry for 3 days. I functioned. I fed my daughter, took a shower, folded towels that weren't mine, answered texts from friends pretending everything was fine. But on the 4th night, after rocking my baby to sleep, I sat on the edge of the bed and sobbed until I choked on my own breath. Not just for him, not just for her, but for the version of me that believed in forever. For the woman who thought love was enough. Part 3. The echoes of what used to be. After the initial shock, life didn't explode. It unraveled. Days at my sister's turned into weeks. She gave me space but watched me like I was glass. I could feel it, her cautious sympathy, her desire to be angry for me, and I appreciated it, even if I couldn't match her rage. My husband, no, the man I used to call my husband, texted every day. At first it was desperate apologies, then promises, then silence. Eventually it was just pictures of our daughter's room, her toys, her crib, untouched. He never asked me to come back, not outright, but every message screamed it. You're still my family. I made a mistake. Please come home. But how could I come home to a house that wasn't mine anymore? Because that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just kick you out of love. It evicts you from your own life. One rainy Sunday, I drove past our old street, just to see it, to prove to myself that it was still there, that everything I left behind was still standing, even if I wasn't. The lights were on in the living room, curtains drawn. For a second, I let myself imagine he was in there alone, staring at the door, waiting for the sound of my key in the lock. But I knew better. She was there, maybe not every night, but enough. It wasn't about sex anymore. It was about replacement. She was younger, untethered, no stretch marks, no midnight feeds, no memory of struggle. He didn't just want affection. He wanted to feel new again. And with her, he could rewrite the parts of himself he hated. The stressed husband, the exhausted father, the man who couldn't keep promises. With her, he could pretend he was still the version of himself I fell in love with, the version he stopped trying to be long ago. The first time I saw them together after it all came out, it was in a grocery store parking lot. He was laughing at something she said, holding her hand as casually as he used to hold mine. And she saw me. She looked surprised, ashamed maybe, but she didn't let go of his hand. I stood there with my daughter on my hip holding a bag of diapers and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was free, because in that moment I saw it all clearly. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had chosen a life I didn't belong to anymore, and that meant I was no longer responsible for saving it. That night, I wrote him a letter, not to forgive, not to rage, but to end it. We spent a decade building something I thought was sacred. I don't regret it, because from that love came the greatest gift of my life, our daughter. But I can't carry the weight of what you broke. You didn't just cheat on me. You left me in the hardest year of our lives. You walked away emotionally long before you touched another woman. And now I'm walking too, not out of bitterness, but because staying would mean betraying myself. We will co-parent. We will be civil. But the chapter of us as husband and wife ends here. I hope one day you understand what you lost. But by then I'll be long gone. I didn't send it. I didn't have to. Writing it was the closure I needed. And I fell asleep for the first time in months without clenching my jaw. Part 4. Rebuilding in silence. My daughter was the reason I got out of bed. Each morning I'd wake to her soft cries, not of distress, but the quiet rhythmic whimpers of a baby who needed her mother. She didn't care that her father had shattered my heart. She didn't care about infidelity, betrayal, or the fact that we now lived in a guest room lined with plastic storage bins and a folding crib. She only needed me. So I showed up. I warmed her bottles. I changed her onesies. I pressed kisses to her forehead as if it could somehow make up for the life I'd hoped she'd have. A life with two parents under one roof, united, whole. But wholeness, I was learning, doesn't come from appearances. It comes from truth. And the truth was, I was healing. Slowly, unevenly, but truly. My sister helped more than she'll ever understand. Not with speeches or forced advice, but with the little things. Folding my laundry without being asked. Making me tea in the evenings. Talking about TV shows instead of my husband. Giving me space to cry without rushing to fix it. One night, as we sat on her porch, wrapped in old blankets and the smell of cold air, she said, "You're stronger than you think." I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, but because I was finally starting to believe it too. Legally, the divorce moved quickly. Emotionally, it felt like molasses. The paperwork asked for division of property, visitation, custody, all sterile words that didn't even come close to capturing the ache of splitting a life in half. He was calm through it all. Polite, almost robotic. Maybe he thought staying composed would make it easier for both of us. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was cowardice. He never asked for forgiveness. He never denied what he did. He never said her name again. And I didn't ask. Some truths, once confirmed, don't need to be relived. They just sit inside you, heavy, permanent. On the day the divorce was finalized, I didn't cry. Instead, I sat in the park with my daughter in my lap, feeding her mashed bananas while the wind tangled my hair. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time. A deep belly giggle that made two passing strangers stop and smile. In that moment, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt found, because in the ashes of what was, something new was beginning. Not perfect, not painless, but real. I went back to work part-time, slowly, cautiously. My old boss had saved my spot, said they understood, said they were proud of how I handled everything. I nodded and smiled, grateful, but inside I knew. No one really knows how you've handled it unless they've seen you at 3 a.m., rocking your baby with one hand and wiping your own tears with the other. Still, showing up again, dressed, caffeinated, functional, felt like a win, a quiet victory in the long war of becoming myself again. Eventually, I stopped checking his social media, stopped imagining what songs they played in the car, what restaurants they went to, what lies he told her to make it all feel justified. I stopped picturing their version of happiness because I had my own, in my daughter's laugh, in the stretch marks that reminded me I carried life, in my reflection, tired, older, but no longer broken. Some days still hurt, but pain is no longer my home. Part 5, Rising from the Ruins. Months passed, and slowly life began to feel like mine again. The weight of betrayal still lingered in the quiet moments. A sudden pang when I saw a couple holding hands, a sharp stab hearing a love song on the radio. But it no longer defined me. I found strength in the small victories. Teaching my daughter to say her first words, celebrating my first solo weekend getaway, and even laughing again without feeling guilty. But the hardest part wasn't moving on. It was forgiving myself, for trusting, for loving blindly, for staying too long. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about them, it was about me, about freeing my soul from the chains of bitterness and pain. I started therapy, the kind where you confront your darkest fears and slowly rebuild the pieces you thought shattered forever. It wasn't easy. Some days I wanted to give up, to sink into the darkness. But then I'd look at my daughter, her innocent eyes full of hope, and remember why I fought so hard to rise. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold, I stood by the window of my new apartment, watching the world move on outside. The air smelled like fresh rain, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of peace. Jason's betrayal had broken me, yes, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still breathing, still building a future. Not the one I imagined, but one I chose. Because sometimes, the greatest love story isn't about two people who never fail each other. It's about the one person who refuses to give up on themselves no matter how dark the night. This is my story, one of heartbreak, betrayal, and unimaginable pain, but also one of survival, courage, and the power of starting over. If you're reading this and feeling lost, know this. You are not alone. Your story isn't over, and your heart is stronger than you think. The end.